getting to grow and build Demandbase pre-pandemic and getting that experience of trying to make things work while a lot of folks were from working from home. Like personally, I'm an advocate of distributed work when done right. I think there's a lot of ways of doing it very poorly. I always thought I'd leave Canada at one point in my career to move to the Bay Area to work in tech for the coolest US companies. But even before COVID, I discovered the possibility of working remotely, staying close to family and friends in Canada, and having that flexibility to set my own hours and still work for cool, amazing companies in the US. So, like, despite the successes of our own companies like GitHub and Automatic and Atlassian, Zapier, Deal, Buffer, like, there's so many of them. Like, there's still plenty of failures along the way, and companies that returned to office or had like a hybrid policy after going all in on distributed work. What's your point of view on remote work, Chris?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? It's because there's so many different factors,
Yeah.
depending on the role. Like engineering talent, they often do work independently. I think experience or age can be a big factor. Like if you're just out of school and you've never learned how to run a meeting, you don't know how to do presentations, all those things, those are factors. There's also an important factor is the individual good at working at home? Because, there's a lot of people that screw off and are not very present. And so, yeah, and you got to have individual desire. There's a lot of people that don't like to work at home. Like, I'm fine with it, but I prefer to be in the office. It was interesting. Just before the pandemic at Demandbase, we did like an exec team offsite. It was one of these personality introvert-extrovert tests. And so when we talked about remote or back in office, it was split right down the middle. Those of us that were more extroverted wanted to be in the office, and those that were more introverted wanted to be at home. It was clear.
Yeah.
Which is fine because you got to have both
Right.
types of folks. And the last piece of it, I think it depends on the stage of a company too. I think it is really hard to start a company and have everybody be distributed where you can't get together at a whiteboard and map things out. So I think there's some benefits there. But, our company is, we have 3 to 5 of us here in an office in Sausalito. And then we have, another half dozen to a dozen people in Seattle and in Utah. And we're generally on the same time zone. So that works out pretty well.
So still offices, like, do you guys have regular times during the year where you'll all meet up in one spot? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We may move it around a little bit. We'll try and get together, 3 times a year as a company. And then individual groups will get together more frequently.
I love your point about like remote work depends on the stage of a person, like how junior they are, how early they are in their career. And I take that for granted because like I spent the first like 8 years of my career working in-house. Like remote wasn't really a thing in my city. Like especially some of the startups I worked at, like folks really valued like butts and seats. Like you're being productive if you're like early in the office and you're like late in the office and you're like always huddled down and working on your laptop, right? But I guess like I still did get a lot of value from that in-person experience and growing up in that environment.
Yeah.
And like you said, learning how to run meetings, design thinking workshops, and having that in-person work, like whiteboard and like the all team meeting, like actually physically in one place and not on Zoom. And so like it does help that experience now, and I can bring it to a distributed workplace. But it's crazy because like some companies are remote and distributed from day one. And what I found interesting is that like my first real remote job was with Close.io, a CRM company. And like they're famous for being like bootstrapped, small team and remote first, but they don't really hire a lot of junior people. It's all like 10 plus years into their career. They're seasoned, they're like expert practitioners at one thing. You don't need to like hold that person's hand. It's not like an entry level gig, right? Like you're not teaching anyone like how to run a meeting. And so like maybe there is something there to what you said. Like it's it's a tricky balance between
Yeah.
like junior folks and not having that like experience of that in-person work.
Yeah. It was people were just getting back to office after the pandemic, and I was going out to our New York office at Demandbase, and the SDR leader said, "Hey, Chris, would you mind doing a Q&A session with the SDR team?" So I go into the office and I'm sitting around the table with, 12, 15 SDRs, and they're all meeting each other for the first time.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh my God. And so as we were talking, they were like, so Chris, do you have any recommendations? And I go, yeah, I'd get your ass in the office. Great. Because but my reason was totally different than what we've been talking about. And it's, you know, you learn so much from one another as, kind of a newer SDR. And so many great relationships are formed over the years, socially. And like, person sitting next to me could be your best friend next year. You don't even know
Mhm.
it. And so part of the value of the culture at Demandbase is we did have like such strong bonds, and kind of that family atmosphere. And you don't get that if you're not with somebody in the same space. It's not the only reason to come in, but SDR teams also learn so much from one another, hearing each other on the phone and sharing, you know, different objections and how they handled it and things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, the water cooler conversations and
Exactly.
yeah, stuff that isn't easy to replicate on Slack. But you mentioned hiring too, and how that's different in a remote world.